Hello and welcome to BierTier, the German engineer explains oxygen not included. Yes, today we are back with another explained episode, and the reason is there are a couple things that we definitely have to talk about. Especially if you're new to the game, this little setup right here, especially the one on the left, ignore the right, is going to be highly important, because this here is a basic heat deletion box and it will come in handy in many applications. But that is not all I have for you today. Because the other thing we are going to talk about is, yes, right in front of us, liquid locks. We have two different versions here, or better to say the version of the liquid lock is the same, but the application is much different, once for gas and once for liquid. But don't worry, those are not the only two actual versions of liquid locks that we are going to look at. But I would say, let's get started with our heat deletion box. And here we are back. So I would say let's turn the overlay back on, let's pause the game, and let's take a look at what we even have here. Because the first building here on the top is a steam turbine. What the steam turbine is built out of is really not that important. I would recommend something like iron. That should get the job done every single day of the year, and you should never have a problem. Then over here we have a liquid reservoir. I also built it out of iron, and it literally doesn't matter what that thing is built out of. Down here on the bottom, the thermal Aquatuner, that is important. It is built out of steel. Anything below steel is not going to work, and anything better than steel is absolute overkill for what we are doing here. And then our liquid pipe thermal sensor right here, once again, doesn't matter what it is made out of. But our insulated tiles around here, I would highly recommend igneous rock or ceramic maybe. That is definitely gonna get the job done, but igneous rock is usually plentiful available, and it is really good to be used as insulated tiles in general. So what else do we have here? Let's take a look at our piping overlay. I would say we're gonna get started over here with our liquid reservoir, and we have the output right here. When we take a look at the output, we have insulated pipes, and these are also made out of igneous rock. And these insulated pipes made out of igneous rock are going to the input right here of our thermal Aquatuner. But we have a bypass down here on the bottom. What does that mean, and how does it work? Well, we are coming into our input, but then we are coming right back of our input into the input of a liquid pipe bridge. That is highly important. But then we are also going to come out of the output of our thermal Aquatuner, and yes, our bridge is connected to it. So what exactly is that good for? Well, if we are turning off our thermal Aquatuner right here for any reason, for example through the automation provided over here by our liquid pipe thermal sensor, then the water would just stop. Our loop would run dry. All this water here would drain back into the tank, if there's space available, of course, and then it would stop. And that is not what we ever want. We want this loop here to continue running, even if our thermal Aquatuner right here is not in use. That is highly important. So when we turn it back on, we can see that happening. Because if I go ahead and I turn off the thermal Aquatuner, and that is what I just did, we can now see right here, yes, we are still continuing our loop, even though our thermal Aquatuner does nothing. And that is exactly what we want. And the moment we turn it back on, we'll just continue working, and there is no problem whatsoever. Isn't that nice? It works, it's just as simple as that, and it is highly important for this setup. There are different versions of how this here can be built, but this here is my standard go-to because it just works, and I never once had a problem with it. Therefore, I honestly don't know what to improve upon it. If we take a look over here to our right, we can see we have radiant liquid pipes, and the radiant liquid pipes are always used when we are in an area that we want to cool down. In this particular case, you have about 100,000 kilograms worth of water per tile in this little box right here, and it's currently at 80 degrees Celsius. And we want to cool it down. That is at least the general idea for this setup here, and of course, this is just an absolute example. And the radiant liquid pipes are made out of aluminum. Aluminum is the best material that you can early on in the game access to build radiant liquid pipes, so if you have it available, I would highly recommend it. If not, cobalt or iron will do as well. They're just not quite as efficient. But other than that, when we are coming out of our reservoir right here, we're just gonna keep on going along here, and then highly important, our steam turbine here is actively cooled. So what exactly does actively cooled mean? Well, when we take a look into here, we can see that we are actively cooling it with the output from our thermal Aquatuner down here. That means actively cooled. So what would be passively cooled? Well, if we would not route our line through here, but through somewhere else, let's say over the top right here, then we could just make all of these here radiant and then feed it straight down back into our steam chamber down here on the bottom. That would mean we are passively cooling it. We are cooling it with the output of our steam turbine, and the output is always 95 degrees Celsius. And those 95 degrees Celsius bring me to the next topic, because how does it even work? Well, It is pretty simple. Down here we have steam, and the steam is currently at about 160 degrees Celsius, and then our steam turbine sucks in this steam, and it takes the steam and converts it to water, and that water is then coming out of here at 95 degrees Celsius, always. And the conversion rate is 100%. The exact amount of steam that we are sucking in will be released back to us in the form of water, so we are not losing anything. This is a completely closed loop system, and that is very nice. And the best part about it is, it doesn't matter what our steam temperature is. Even if it would be at 500 degrees Celsius, we will still get water back at 95 degrees Celsius, which means we are literally deleting heat. Our steam turbine right here only has really one requirement, and that requirement is that its own temperature is below 100 degrees Celsius. As long as that is a given, we will never have a problem. Above 100 degrees Celsius, it will just stop working, which is why I personally always recommend actively cooling it if at all possible, because passively cooling can fail eventually if you cannot contain the heat anymore and your steam is getting hotter and hotter, and the 95 degrees Celsius water is just not enough to keep it cool. So, actively cooled is the way to go. The next question to answer is, of course, what do we have in our pipes? And in this case here, we already saw it earlier, it is polluted water. But why is it polluted water, and can we use something else? Let's take a look. Right here in front of us, I built a little box, and when we take a look at this box, on the very bottom we have water, then we have polluted water, we have crude oil, we have petroleum, and we have supercoolant on the top. And these are the 5 fluids that I personally recommend to put into your cooling loop. Mainly being used is, of course, polluted water, and that is what we're gonna take a closer look at. So when we click on our polluted water and we see in here in the information tab, we have 4 different values that are important to us: the freezing point, the evaporation point, the specific heat capacity, and the thermal conductivity. So what do all of these mean? Let's check it out. The freezing point, negative 20.6 degrees, means at negative 20.6 degrees, our polluted water will become, well, polluted ice. It will go from a liquid into a solid state, and that is what we want to prevent at all costs. And our evaporation point means at 119.4 degrees, we are going from a liquid state into a gaseous state, which means, of course, we are creating steam, which is also not something that we want inside of our liquid pipes. The freezing point up here on the top is also the main reason why we are usually using polluted water, because we want to cool it down lower than 0 degrees, and 0 degrees is of course the freezing point of water. So at negative 20.6 degrees, we are getting 20 degrees of extra cooling out of it. We can go below 0, and that is usually what we want. But what else do we have going on down here? Well, next on the list is of course the specific heat capacity, and this is a value that tells us how well a certain material, in this case our polluted water, can retain heat once it has it. And that is of course a good thing to know. The higher this value is, the more heat can be sucked out of the environment. And then last but not least, we have our thermal conductivity right here, and the thermal conductivity is a value that tells us how well a material can soak up or emit heat. That is the general idea here. Of course, both of those values, the higher the better. And I have a little chart here so you can see all of those values for each and every one. But right now, for a direct comparison, let's take a look at this here. Yes, this here is supercoolant at a whooping 8.44 and an even more insane 9.46 in specific heat capacity and thermal conductivity respectively. It of course goes without saying, supercoolant is a very, very late game material, one of the latest ones you will get, but once you have it, your life will be a hell of a lot easier if you want to create something like liquid oxygen, for example, and you will need that for space travel. But let's take a quick look at this chart here that I mentioned earlier, and if you want to pause the game, of course, do that, take a screenshot and have it available whenever you need it in your own game. And of course, you can just click on the different fluids in your game to see the same information as well. But now, let's take a quick look back at our heat deletion box. And here we are back. And the last thing that I want to look at really quick is our liquid pipe thermal sensor, because now we can talk about it. It is set to negative 5 degrees Celsius. And you're probably wondering, why only negative 5 degrees? We can go all the way to negative 20.6. Well, the reason for it is that our thermal Aquatuner right here will cool down any single packet of fluid that goes through it by exactly 14 degrees Celsius. So if I'm at negative 5 degrees Celsius and I'm taking away another 14, I'm at a negative 19, which gives me a 1.6 degree safety net to make sure that my polluted water never ever freezes in my pipes. And that is the entire setup to build a heat deletion box. And of course, you can make the pipes as long as you want. You can cool with it whatever you want. For example, the entirety of your base could could be cooled by one of these here. All the living quarters for your dupes, whatever you want, you can have it at whatever temperature you would like to have. All you need is some steel for our thermal Aquatuner, and our steam turbine on the top does actually require some plastic. It's literally this simple. But let's take a look at liquid locks. Right here, we have two of our liquid locks that I showed you earlier. So let's take a look at it. How does it work and why does it work? We're gonna get started right here on the bottom. We have a very simple step setup, and we can see when I use my dig tool right here, we have at least 2 tiles, here we have at least 2 tiles, and here we have also at least 2 tiles. And that is the requirement that we need so a dupe can go in and out of here. So yes, even though it looks a little bit odd, a dupe can easily come in and out of this area whenever a dupe chooses to do so. Next on the list is to fill this area here up with water. We can see it down on the bottom. We have 1,000 kilograms that fills this tile up here completely, and on the top we have almost nothing. In this case here 33.3 kilogram, but it could be even less than that or more. It doesn't really matter too much. If you have it available, I wouldn't really care about it. But what's going on here is that the game mechanic that makes this here happen is that only one element can occupy one cell at a time. So if you take a look into our F4 overlay, we have hydrogen in here. 450,000 kilograms per tile of hydrogen, which is, as you can imagine, a hell of a lot. But it doesn't matter what the pressure in here is, because no matter what, this water here will not move. Which means also the only way to actually break this system here is to either release it by accidentally deconstructing one of those tiles right here, or by boiling it off. Those are the only 2 ways that you could break it, because even if you were to freeze it, it would be a solid, and also our gas cannot go through a solid, which means boiling or removing it are the only 2 ways to break this system, which makes it extremely safe for daily use inside of your own base. Next on the list is one step higher, and we can see it. Yes, we are using now crude oil for it. And there's a reason why we are using crude oil here. Down here on the bottom, it really doesn't matter. You can put almost anything in here as long as the temperature range is big enough so it doesn't boil off. So we could have also used crude oil here, and it would have made no difference whatsoever. Here on the top though, we do need crude oil, because in this case here, our liquid lock is containing another liquid and not a gas. And we can see it. Yes, we have water in here. 52,000, 67,000, 70,000 kilograms per tile. Yes, of course, that is a hell of a lot of water, but still our crude oil is staying strong. So why exactly does this here work, even though it's 2 fluids? Well, the mechanic is really the same, because 2 elements cannot occupy the same tile at the same time, which means that our water cannot go anywhere. Especially, and that is why the crude oil is important, our crude oil is denser and therefore heavier than our water, and therefore they will not mix. If we would mix this here up and we would put crude oil into the reservoir and we will put water down here, now we would have a problem, because the crude oil is heavier and it will push our water out of the way. Therefore, if you're trying to contain liquids with a liquid lock, you need to think through your materials that you're using for your liquid lock, because it needs to be denser than the liquid that you're trying to contain. But let's take a look at some other uses. Right here, I have a double liquid lock. So why exactly would I do that? Doesn't that waste even more space? Well, in this case here is a really good reason for it, because right here we have once again hydrogen. But this time around, the hydrogen is at 326 degrees Celsius, which is something that could happen in a normal base. Hydrogen can get extremely hot, or for that matter, extremely cold. So for the hotness of this hydrogen, I put crude oil in here. And we can see it, the crude oil itself is extremely hot, 105 degrees Celsius, and that is certainly a temperature we don't want inside of our base. But what exactly can we do about it? Well, you can see it right here. I created a vacuum, and on the other side of the vacuum, I just built another liquid lock with water. And the reason is that a vacuum will not conduct any heat whatsoever. It doesn't matter how hot or how cold it is, it will not get through a vacuum, which makes this double lock setup here perfect for not only containing any gases or any environments in general, but also for containing heat. So I can highly recommend a setup like this here if you're trying to contain any sort of heat or cold in an area, but you do not want to let it out to the rest of your base. And then next on the list, I have two little oddballs right here that I personally don't really use that often, but it is a completely viable thing. There's nothing wrong with it, but there are some downsides to it, which we will take a look at. So let's get started here on the top. This one here is a stacked single tile liquid lock, and we can see it is created by two different liquids. In this guy here, it's water on the top and crude oil on the bottom. Once again, of course, the denser fluid has to be on the bottom, which is the crude oil, and the water is just above it. And it's very, very little of it. We are having 34.3 grams right here and 61 grams of crude oil. Grams, not kilograms, not tons, just grams. It's almost nothing. But it works. A dupe can easily go through here, go into the hydrogen, do whatever they have to do, and come back out. And this is where the problems start mounting, because in our original design, you remember the step design, we had only two ways of breaking it, and that was boiling it off or accidentally releasing it. Here, we can even mop it up on accident. For example, if I'm trying to give a mop command right here, a dupe would do that. It says here unreachable mop, and that is because there is no dupe that can reach it. But if there would be a dupe, the dupe would happily come by, mop it up, and walk away like nothing has ever happened. And now we have 500 tons worth of hydrogen in our base. Certainly something that we do not want. So you need to be very careful. And of course, we are only working with 61 and 34 grams right here, which also means we can easily boil it off or freeze it if we are not extremely careful. So only use this here with caution if you are actually sure that none of those cases will happen and you will not accidentally break it, or if it is not 100% crucial. You could also combine the two. For example, if you wanted to have a vacuum layer in this area, you could just build a normal liquid lock right here. And even if this one here should break for one reason or another, the only thing that will leak out into your base is heat, and that is at least something that you can remedy. 500 tons of hydrogen is not going to be fun. But what do we have down here? We can of course also do it with a single piece, but you are probably wondering, why in the hell would I do that? How is that going to help me? Well, it's not really helping a dupe very much. A dupe can reach through here and get stuff, but what we mainly want it for is in shipping, and it is an auto sweeper. If I take an auto sweeper and I plop it right here and we take a look at its range, yes, it can reach all of these tiles right here. And now what could we do with that information? Well, for example, we could plop a couple fridges in here, because this area here is at negative 38 degrees Celsius. So we could build a system where we are dropping food in this extremely cold area right here. It goes into the fridge, it will be stored, and then our auto sweeper here can grab it and then move it to wherever we need it. That is just an idea. Even if you don't want to put a fridge in here because it's not really needed to store it, you can just drop it on the floor and it will work just fine. Our auto sweeper can still reach it, and it can still move it from here all the way to the outside, and right here in the middle we have a vacuum, so we are not releasing the cold in this area. And of course, that is just one idea how this here could be done, or better to say what it could be used for in a practical sense, but just so you get an idea of how it works and what it does. And of course, just like before, it only needs a few grams of liquid to work, like in this case here 61.8 grams of crude oil. But very briefly, let's take another look at this system up here on the top, but this time around I'm going to show you how to build it, because I have a feeling you have been wondering about that. And right here we have our building test setup. So what exactly is going on here? Well, we do have two pipes coming in. On the bottom we have crude oil, and on the top we have water. So how exactly does it work? Well, we can go ahead and we can deconstruct those liquid bridges right here, so they're gone. And now we have just two single pieces of pipe right here. The bottom filled with 10 kilograms of crude oil and the top filled with 10 kilograms of water. So now let's build a tile right here so it doesn't go everywhere. And now we deconstruct this bottom tile here. When we deconstruct it, this here is going to happen. It takes a tiny little bit of time, and once it settles down, we can just mop it up. And once again, since I'm in sandbox mode, it of course goes instantly, but if you would do the same thing in a real game, the dupes would do exactly the same and it would not make a difference whatsoever. But now let's take a look. Of course, the next step is to deconstruct the second one as well. And this time I'm doing it live without the game being paused, and we will wait and wait and wait, and now it has settled down, which means we can now mop the rest up, and now we have a liquid lock. Let me just real quick get rid of this stuff right here, and now we can see it. On the top we have 35.5 grams, and on the bottom we have 382.4. And don't worry about those values here, because they are rather random. Sometimes you have a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, and it makes no difference whatsoever. Before we move on to the last thing that I want to talk about, let's take another look at a second method of how to build it. I can just plop a bottle emptier literally right here, can plop some crude oil oil down, then some water on top, mop it all up in that order, and it will work just the same. It's just more tedious, it makes a bigger mess. Overall, in my opinion, it's just nowhere near as clean, which is why I personally wouldn't recommend it, even though a lot of other people and a lot of other guides may tell you something different. But again, I personally am not a big fan of it, and I prefer to do it with pipes if and whenever I have them available. And last but not least for today, we are back at our heat deletion box. And you can see it, my goodness, somebody built a smart battery in there and it's accidentally made out of copper. And of course now it's taking damage because our steam is at 160 degrees Celsius. Yep, that is a problem and we have to fix it. But how in the hell do we get in here? 160 degrees Celsius, 31 kilograms per tile of steam. If we're just going to open up the sidewall right here, we are going to be in one hell of a world of hurt. So we are not going to do that. But what else are we going to do? We are going to grab us an insulated tile, and then we're going to come a little bit over here so we can actually see what we're doing. That would be helpful. And then we're going to build one right here, 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 and here. And then right here, we're just gonna come down too. And that is of course very nice that it works out this way because our liquid reservoir is already here and ready for it. Yeah, it's literally this simple. Now that we have our staircase here built, we of course need to fill it with a fluid, and since we have steam in here, we can't really use water, or that would of course evaporate as well, so we are going to use crude oil. And right here, I'm gonna take 800 kilograms worth of oil, that is at 70 degrees Celsius. Those are just some default settings, I didn't really mess with it. So we're gonna plop it right here, and then I'm gonna drop it down to, let's say, 100 kilograms, and drop 100 kilograms right above it. And just like that, now we have a liquid lock available. The next thing that we need is right here. We have now oxygen in here. We can see it in our F4 overlay, and that is certainly something that we don't want. So what can we do about it? And once again, works just as well in a real game. We can grab a tile, we can copy it and have a dupe build one tile right here and one tile right there. And once it's built, we're just gonna come back in and we're gonna destroy, or better to say deconstruct, this tile, and now we have a vacuum. Again, of course, it works instantly here, but it works exactly the same in a real game. Now that we have that, a dupe can come by and deconstruct this tile and deconstruct this tile. And now our heat deletion box is absolutely accessible, no problem whatsoever. I can come in here, I can deconstruct the smart battery, and if I still want it, I can make it out of something more suitable like steel, place it back down, come by, have the dupes clean up, and yeah, now we are good to go. And the last but not least thing is, we're gonna build a tile right here, then a tile right here, and then we're going to build a tile right there. And then last but not least, we are going to build this tile. And now we are back to exactly where we started, almost like nothing has ever happened, just that we now have a smart battery that is not breaking, and all of that has been done within a cycle or two of in-game time. Isn't that nice? And once again, everything you have seen in this episode can be done extremely easily inside of a real game as well. But that is all I have for you today, so if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like on the video, and of course comment down below. Especially if you have any topics you want to know more about, please let me know, and I'm happy to take a look at it. And with that I say thank you, and peace.